Rome was not born powerful. At a time when Roman society was divided by class struggles, the future empire was fighting simply to survive. This was not a story of inevitable greatness, but one of constant, desperate struggle against overwhelming odds. The Rome of legend, a city destined for empire, was in reality a fledgling republic on the brink of collapse, surrounded by enemies and torn apart from within. Its very existence was a daily uncertainty, a fragile flame flickering in the winds of war and internal strife that swept across the Italian peninsula. During the rule of the Etruscan kings, a period shrouded in a mix of history and myth, Rome had established a foothold in the region. It was a local power, controlling the fertile lowlands of Latium and projecting an aura of strength that kept its neighbors at bay. The surrounding hill tribes, the fierce Sabines, the relentless Volscians, watched the growing city with a mixture of fear and envy. Under its foreign monarchs, Rome had become a significant player, a kingdom whose military might was respected and whose influence was expanding. It seemed for a brief moment that this city on the Tiber was carving out a secure domain for itself. But when the last Tarquin king, Tarquin the Proud, was expelled in 509 BC, everything changed. The monarchy, which had given Rome a semblance of unity and direction, was dismantled. In its place, a new and untested form of government was born, the Republic. This radical political experiment, founded on the principle of shared power and the rejection of kings, was seen by many as a fatal weakness. Rome's neighbors, once held in check by the power of its kings, now saw an opportunity. They believed the young republic, consumed by internal conflict between the patrician elite and the plebeian masses, would inevitably tear itself apart. The city's fall was not a matter of if, but when. For nearly 150 years, the Roman Republic fought a relentless, grinding war for its very survival. This was not a period of glorious conquest, but of desperate defense. Enemies attacked from every direction, a seemingly endless tide of hostility crashing against the city's defenses. The Volsci and the Aequi descended from their mountain strongholds, raiding Roman lands and threatening its agricultural heartland. The Sabines, ancient rivals, pressed in from the northeast. Etruscan cities to the north, resentful of Rome's newfound independence, sought to reclaim their influence. These conflicts were not distant border skirmishes. They were existential threats. Enemy armies often reached the very walls of Rome itself, their campfires visible from the Capitoline Hill. A constant, terrifying reminder of the city's vulnerability. The citizens of Rome lived under a state of perpetual siege, where every man was a soldier and every harvest could be the last. Yet Rome survived. Against all expectations, the fractured republic did not shatter. It endured. This survival was forged in the crucible of constant warfare. The endless conflicts hardened its people, honing their military discipline and fostering a unique, stubborn resilience. The internal class struggles, though bitter, were often set aside when the city faced an external threat, creating a paradoxical unity born of shared danger. Each victory, no matter how small, was a testament to their tenacity. Each year the city stood was another defiance of fate. Slowly, painstakingly, the Romans learned not just to defend their walls, but to push back, to carry the fight to the enemy. They did not just survive. They learned, they adapted, and they grew stronger with every blow they withstood. The turning point, the moment when the tide began to shift decisively, came in 343 BC. Far to the south, near the fertile banks of the Liris River in Campania, the powerful Sabellian tribes, known as the Samnites, clashed with the smaller city-states of the region. When the city of Capua, facing annihilation, appealed to Rome for aid, the Romans were faced with a critical choice: intervene and risk a war with a formidable new enemy, or remain passive and watch a potential rival dominate southern Italy. The Senate chose to act. The ensuing conflict, the First Samnite War, marked a pivotal moment in Roman history. This moment marked the end of Rome's slow, defensive expansion and the beginning of something far greater. The wars that followed were no longer about mere survival or the defense of Latium. They were about supremacy. The decision to confront the Samnites drew Rome into a series of epic, decades-long conflicts that would test the Republic to its absolute limits. This was a clash of titans, a struggle between the two greatest military powers on the Italian peninsula for control of its destiny. The Samnite Wars were brutal, costly, and saw Rome suffer devastating defeats, yet each time the Republic rose again, more determined and more organized than before. From 343 to 269 BC, a period of less than a century, Rome underwent a breathtaking transformation. Through the three great Samnite Wars, the Latin War, and conflicts with the Etruscans and Gauls, the Republic systematically dismantled all opposition. It transformed from a regional power, one among many, into the undisputed master of the Italian peninsula. It was a revolution forged in blood and iron. Rome developed a sophisticated system of alliances, colonies, and military roads, binding the conquered territories to its will, not just with force, but with infrastructure and law. The city that had once fought for its life at its own gates now commanded a vast, integrated territory stretching from the Po Valley to the southern tip of Calabria. This was the beginning of Rome's destiny. The long, desperate struggle for survival had forged an unbreakable spirit and a peerless military machine. The city on the Seven Hills had not only weathered the storm, but had emerged as its master. With the Italian peninsula now unified under its control, Rome stood on the precipice of a new era. It looked out from its shores across the Mediterranean, not as a vulnerable republic, but as a nascent superpower ready to confront the established empires of the age. The long, dark dawn of survival was over. A new sun was rising, and with it, the Roman Empire was about to be born. Alliances, strategy, and the fall of old enemies. Rome did not conquer Italy with brute force alone. Its greatest weapon was strategy through alliances. After 493 BC, Rome formed a critical treaty with the Latins of Campania. This pact, known as the Fidus Cassianum, marked a turning point for the young republic. The alliance was natural. Both peoples shared common ancestry, spoke related languages, and practiced similar religious rites. More importantly, they shared a common enemy, the aggressive mountain tribes of the Apennines. At first, the alliance was a partnership of equals, designed for mutual defense. The Latins, a confederacy of city-states, saw Rome as a powerful ally to help secure their territory. But geography favored Rome. Rome's strategic position on the Tiber River placed it directly in the path of its primary enemies, the Aequi to the east and the Volsci to the south. The Latins, situated further south in Campania, were often shielded from the initial brunt of these attacks. This meant Rome's armies were constantly tested, hardened by perpetual conflict. While the Latins enjoyed relative peace, Rome's military prowess and experience grew with every campaign. Rome grew stronger, the Latins grew weaker. The Roman system of alliances was not merely a military arrangement, it was a sophisticated diplomatic machine. By 486 BC, Rome expanded its network, forging a treaty with the Hernici. This tribe occupied a crucial corridor between the lands of the Aequi and the Volsci, effectively driving a wedge between Rome's two most dangerous foes. This tripartite alliance created a powerful defensive buffer that stabilized central Italy and allowed Rome to methodically project its power. This network of treaties became the bedrock of Roman security for nearly 150 years. Still, victories were slow and hard-won. The early republic's existence was precarious. For decades, Rome struggled in a seemingly endless cycle of warfare against its neighbors. It fought fierce campaigns against powerful Etruscan cities to the north and endured relentless raids from the Apennine hill tribes. The fighting was often defensive and desperate. These conflicts were not distant wars fought in foreign lands. They were battles for survival. Raids continued unabated until 449 BC, often bringing war to Rome's very gates and threatening the city's existence. The early Romans lived under constant threat, a reality that forged their resilient and militaristic character. Then came a breakthrough. For a century, Rome had been locked in a rivalry with Veii, a wealthy and powerful Etruscan city just 10 miles to the north. Veii was not just a competitor, it was Rome's nemesis, an ancient foe that challenged its control over the vital Tiber trade route. The final war between them lasted a decade, a grueling siege that pushed Roman resources to their absolute limit. In 396 BC, after a legendary effort attributed to the dictator Marcus Furius Camillus, Roman soldiers finally breached Veii's defenses. The capture of Veii, Rome's ancient Etruscan rival, changed everything. The victory was total. Rome didn't just defeat Veii, it absorbed its vast territory, doubling the size of the Ager Romanus, Roman land, overnight. With Veii defeated, its resources and population integrated into the Roman state, Rome controlled the entire lower Tiber Valley. This strategic triumph secured its northern borders from Etruscan threats and provided a massive influx of wealth and land to distribute among its citizens. The psychological impact was just as profound. Rome had vanquished its greatest enemy. Rome was no longer defending, Rome was advancing. The fall of the Western Roman Empire left a power vacuum in Italy, a void filled by bloodshed and chaos. The peninsula, once the heart of a vast empire, became a battleground for barbarian kings, Byzantine generals, and ambitious popes. For centuries, it knew no peace, no unity, no single master. Out of this crucible of conflict, a new power began to rise. Not a kingdom, not an empire, but a city. A city built on water, trade, and cunning. Venice. By the 9th century, the Venetian lagoon was a refuge from the mainland's turmoil. Its people, forged from the remnants of Roman Italy, looked not to the land, but to the sea. Their ships, the lifeblood of the city, plied the Adriatic, carrying salt, fish, and timber. They traded with the Byzantine Empire to the east and the fractured Germanic kingdoms to the west. This burgeoning maritime republic grew rich. Its doges, elected for life, commanded a growing fleet. Its merchants established outposts along the Dalmatian coast. Venice was becoming a dominant force in the Adriatic, a sea it would soon call its own. But this rise did not go unnoticed. To the north, the Holy Roman Empire, inheritor of Charlemagne's legacy, saw Italy as its birthright. Emperors dreamed of restoring the glory of Rome under their German rule. To the south, the Norman kingdom of Sicily, forged by Viking adventurers, cast an ambitious eye over the entire peninsula. In the center, the papacy in Rome, wielding the spiritual authority of Christendom, fought to maintain its own temporal power, its papal states a kingdom in their own right. And across the sea, the Byzantine Empire, the true heir of Rome, still saw Italy as a lost province to be reclaimed. Italy was a prize to be won, a land divided among giants. The stage was set for a conflict that would define the destiny of the peninsula for generations. The first major clash came from the north. In the mid-12th century, the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, a man of immense ambition and military skill, descended into Italy. His goal was simple: to impose imperial authority over the wealthy, independent-minded city-states of Lombardy, Milan, Pavia, Cremona. These cities, enriched by trade and industry, had grown accustomed to governing themselves. They formed leagues, built walls, and raised citizen militias. They would not bow to a foreign emperor easily. The Lombard League was formed, a coalition of northern Italian cities united against a common threat. They found a powerful, if unlikely, ally: the papacy. Pope Alexander III, fearing imperial domination more than republican independence, threw his support behind the League. The conflict was brutal. Imperial armies laid siege to cities. Milan, the heart of the resistance, was captured and razed to the ground in 1162. Its citizens were scattered, a grim warning to all who dared defy the emperor. But the Italian spirit of independence was not so easily extinguished. The Lombard League rebuilt its forces. With papal funds and Venetian naval support, they prepared for a decisive confrontation. The cities of the League, so often rivals, now stood shoulder to shoulder. They rebuilt Milan, a symbol of their defiance. The climax came at the Battle of Legnano in 1176. The emperor's elite German knights, the backbone of his army, charged the Lombard lines. They crashed into the Carroccio, a sacred war wagon that served as the mobile altar and command center of the Milanese army. Around it stood the Company of Death, a band of soldiers who had sworn an oath to conquer or die. The fighting was desperate. The Lombard line began to buckle under the weight of the imperial charge. But at the critical moment, the League's cavalry, which had seemed to be in retreat, swung around and smashed into the emperor's flank. The imperial army was routed. Barbarossa himself was unhorsed and believed to be dead. He barely escaped the battlefield in disguise. The victory at Legnano was a turning point. It demonstrated that disciplined citizen infantry could defeat the supposedly invincible feudal knights of the emperor. The Peace of Constance, signed in 1183, was a compromise, but a victory for the cities. They formally acknowledged the emperor's suzerainty, but in practice they retained the right to elect their own officials, make their own laws, and govern their own territories. Their independence was secured. The dream of a unified Italy under a German emperor was shattered. But the struggle for control of the peninsula was far from over. With the imperial threat contained, the long-simmering rivalry between the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire erupted into a full-scale ideological and military war. This conflict gave birth to two factions that would tear Italy apart for over a century. The Guelphs, who supported the Pope, the Ghibellines, who supported the Emperor. This was not a simple political division. It was a chasm that ran through the heart of Italian society. City fought city. Families were divided. Brother turned against brother. Florence, a Guelph stronghold, battled Siena, a Ghibelline bastion. In the north, the Guelphs of Milan fought the Ghibellines of Pavia. The conflict was a complex web of alliances, betrayals, and vendettas that consumed generations. The struggle was personified by two towering figures, Emperor Frederick II, Barbarossa's grandson, and a succession of powerful popes, most notably Gregory IX and Innocent IV. Frederick II was a man out of his time. Raised in Sicily, he was known as Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. He was a brilliant administrator, a patron of the arts and sciences, a fluent speaker of 6 languages, and a skilled military commander. He ruled his kingdom of Sicily with an iron fist, creating a centralized, modern state that was the envy of Europe. But his vision of a unified Italy under his imperial rule brought him into direct and irreconcilable conflict with the papacy. The popes saw him as the Antichrist, a threat not just to their temporal power in Italy, but to the spiritual authority of the Church itself. The popes excommunicated Frederick multiple times. They preached crusades against him, portraying the war as a holy struggle against a heretic. The wars of the Guelphs and Ghibellines were devastating. They were not wars of grand battles, but of endless sieges, raids, and assassinations. The countryside was ravaged, trade was disrupted, and the fabric of society was torn asunder. In the end, neither side could achieve a decisive victory. Frederick II died in 1250, his grand project incomplete. His heirs were unable to hold on to his legacy. The imperial cause in Italy withered. The papacy had seemingly won. It had broken the power of the Hohenstaufen dynasty and thwarted the imperial dream. But the victory came at a terrible cost. To defeat Frederick and his heirs, the popes had called in a new foreign power. Charles of Anjou, the ambitious and ruthless brother of the King of France, was invited into Italy to claim the Kingdom of Sicily. With papal blessing and French arms, Charles crushed Frederick's last heir at the Battle of Tagliacozzo in 1268. The Hohenstaufen line was extinguished. The popes had replaced one threat with another. The Angevin dynasty now controlled southern Italy, and their French influence began to dominate the papacy itself. This culminated in the Sicilian Vespers of 1282, a bloody uprising against French rule in Sicily, which brought yet another foreign power, the Spanish House of Aragon, into the Italian equation. The peninsula remained fractured. The dream of a united Italy, whether under an emperor or a pope, had failed. The conflicts had exhausted the great powers that sought to dominate it. The Holy Roman Empire's influence was confined to the far north. The papacy, weakened by the long struggle and its dependence on France, would soon enter a period of crisis known as the Avignon Papacy, where the popes resided not in Rome, but in France, puppets of the French king. The south was divided between French and Spanish dynasties. Into this power vacuum stepped new players. The age of the great foreign powers was ending. The age of the Italian city-states was beginning. Florence, Milan, and Venice, which had grown rich and powerful even amidst the chaos, now found themselves the true masters of their own destinies. Freed from the overarching struggle between Pope and Emperor, they began to expand, creating regional states that dominated northern and central Italy. The wars had not brought unity. They had instead entrenched division. But they had also forged a fierce spirit of independence and a dynamic political landscape, unlike any other in Europe. The stage was now set, not for a single ruler, but for a deadly game of thrones played between the great Italian powers themselves. The future of Italy would be decided not by emperors or popes, but by the condottieri, bankers, and doges of the rising city-states. By the early 20th century, China was a nation in fragments. The Qing dynasty, once mighty, was now a hollow shell. Warlords carved up the country into personal fiefdoms. Foreign powers held sway over treaty ports and economic zones. China's humiliation seemed complete. Its ancient civilization was on the brink of collapse. Then came a new generation. These were students, intellectuals, and revolutionaries, burning with a desire to save their nation. They looked to new ideas, new models, and new paths to restore China's greatness. In this chaotic landscape, two major forces would emerge to contest the country's future. One was the Kuomintang, or KMT, the nationalist party, led by a military man named Chiang Kai-shek. The other was the fledgling Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. In 1926, these two parties, a coalition of convenience, launched the Northern Expedition. Their goal was audacious: to march north from their base in Guangzhou, crush the warlords, and reunify China under a single government. The expedition was a stunning success. Warlord armies, often poorly equipped and riddled with internal divisions, melted away before the disciplined, motivated National Revolutionary Army. Within 2 years, the KMT-CCP alliance had swept across southern and central China, capturing major cities like Shanghai and Nanjing. But this unity was a facade, a temporary truce in an ideological war. Chiang Kai-shek, a staunch anti-communist, viewed his allies with deep suspicion. He saw them not as partners in national salvation, but as a cancerous growth that needed to be excised. The breaking point came in Shanghai, the jewel of the Yangtze River Delta, a city of immense wealth and a hotbed of communist-led labor activism. In April 1927, Chiang made his move. In a brutal, systematic purge known as the Shanghai Massacre, KMT-aligned forces, aided by the city's criminal gangs, hunted down and executed thousands of communists, labor leaders, and suspected sympathizers. The White Terror, as it became known, was devastating. The CCP, which had been a primarily urban-based party, was shattered. Its leadership was decimated, its networks dismantled, and its surviving members were forced to flee for their lives. The dream of an urban proletarian revolution, inspired by the Bolsheviks in Russia, was dead. For the communists, it was a moment of existential crisis. Hunted in the cities, they were forced into the countryside, a landscape they had previously neglected. It was here, among the vast, impoverished rural population, that a new leader with a new strategy would rise. His name was Mao Zedong. Mao, unlike the Soviet-trained orthodox Marxists in his party, believed China's revolutionary potential lay not with the small urban working class, but with its hundreds of millions of peasants. He argued that the countryside could encircle and eventually capture the cities. From the rugged mountains of Jiangxi and Hunan provinces, Mao and other communist leaders like Zhu De began to build a new kind of force. They established rural bases, known as Soviets, and began experimenting with land reform, redistributing property from wealthy landlords to poor peasants. This policy won them crucial support among the rural populace, who provided recruits, intelligence, and supplies. They also forged the Red Army, a guerrilla force designed to fight a protracted war against a technologically superior enemy. Mao's strategy was one of survival and attrition. The enemy advances, we retreat. The enemy camps, we harass. The enemy tires, we attack. The enemy retreats, we pursue. This was the essence of guerrilla warfare. The Red Army avoided decisive, set-piece battles with the powerful KMT forces. Instead, they used their knowledge of the terrain and the support of the local population to conduct raids, ambushes, and sabotage, melting back into the mountains and forests before the enemy could retaliate. Chiang Kai-shek, having established his new national government in Nanjing, was determined to eradicate this communist bandit threat once and for all. Between 1930 and 1934, he launched a series of 5 massive encirclement campaigns. He poured hundreds of thousands of his best troops into the communist-held areas, building a network of roads and fortified blockhouses to slowly tighten the noose around the Jiangxi Soviet, the communists' main base. The first 4 campaigns were failures. The KMT forces, unfamiliar with the terrain and vulnerable to Mao's guerrilla tactics, were bled white. But the 5th encirclement campaign was different. Chiang, adopting a new strategy devised by his German military advisors, advanced slowly and methodically. Instead of plunging deep into communist territory, his armies built interconnected blockhouses, strangling the Red Army's ability to maneuver and cutting it off from outside supplies. At the same time, the CCP's leadership, now dominated by a group of Soviet-backed figures known as the 28 Bolsheviks, sidelined Mao. They abandoned his proven guerrilla tactics in favor of conventional positional warfare, ordering the Red Army to defend the Soviets' borders head-on against the overwhelming KMT forces. The result was a catastrophe. The Red Army suffered horrific casualties and was pushed to the brink of annihilation. By October 1934, the situation was untenable. The Jiangxi Soviet was on the verge of collapse. The CCP leadership made a desperate decision to abandon their base and attempt a strategic retreat. It was a gamble of epic proportions. Approximately 86,000 Red Army soldiers, along with thousands of party cadres and support personnel, broke through the KMT's weakest lines and began a monumental trek into the unknown. This was the beginning of the Long March. It was not a single orderly march, but a chaotic, year-long ordeal of retreat and pursuit. The communists snaked their way across the vast expanse of western China, heading for a remote and uncertain sanctuary in the north. They were relentlessly pursued by KMT forces from the ground and attacked by their aircraft from the sky. They faced not only the enemy but also treacherous terrain, snow-capped mountains, raging rivers, and desolate grasslands. They fought dozens of battles, not just against the KMT, but also against local warlords and hostile ethnic groups whose lands they crossed. Starvation, disease, and combat took a terrible toll. The crossing of the Xiang River was a particularly brutal disaster, where the Red Army, burdened by heavy equipment and documents, lost more than half its strength in a single week. The failure of the conventional tactics became undeniable. It was during this desperate flight, at a conference in the town of Zunyi in January 1935, that the tide of power within the party finally turned. The 28 Bolsheviks were discredited, and Mao Zedong, the master of rural and guerrilla warfare, was elevated to a position of supreme leadership. Under Mao's command, the Long March changed character. The cumbersome baggage was discarded. The army was broken into smaller, more mobile columns. They moved with stealth and deception, feinting in one direction while marching in another, constantly keeping the KMT off balance. The most legendary episode was the crossing of the Dadu River. To secure their passage, a small group of volunteers had to brave intense enemy fire to traverse the Luding Bridge, an iron chain suspension bridge with most of its wooden planks removed. Their heroic success saved the Red Army from being trapped and destroyed. After marching for 370 days and covering an astonishing 9,000 kilometers, the remnants of the Red Army finally reached their destination in the barren lands of Shanxi province in northern China in October 1935. Of the 86,000 who had set out from Jiangxi, fewer than 8,000 survived. In purely military terms, the Long March was a retreat, a desperate flight from annihilation. Yet it was transformed through the power of propaganda into a foundational myth for the Chinese Communist Party. It was a testament to the resilience, dedication, and revolutionary will of its fighters. It solidified Mao Zedong's undisputed leadership and vindicated his strategy of protracted rural warfare. The survivors of the march formed the hardened, fanatically loyal core of the party's leadership for the next 50 years. From their new base in Yan'an, the communists would regroup, rebuild, and prepare for the next stage of their struggle. The Long March was not the end of the war, but a new beginning. This decision to endure, to retreat in order to advance another day, preserved the CCP and laid the groundwork for its eventual triumph over the KMT 14 years later. China had completed the first stage of its revolutionary destiny.